In today's ultra-modern world, we made ourselves a part of the most secure devices, without even assuming that could be our biggest enemy. In this day and age, we are surrounded by security devices that can turn out to be our biggest enemies without us suspecting so. But these technologies have become a bridge to something else. Different. My neighbor, old Bob Miller, who for 15 years had worked at Ring as a security engineer, invited me once into his garage, where he had several old video doorbells. "Look," he said, hands shaking, as he pulled the disassembled device out. "We believe we control technology, but it has been controlling us for some time now. There are things they see that we would never even show our customers." His voice trailed off as he looked at one of the dismantled ones. "They're not just cameras. They are transmitting something." 2147 Oak Street was the perfect ideal that comes out in the ad brochures. A lawn striped in neat trim, a minivan sparkling in the driveway, a Christmas tree sporting garlands in the window twinkling at March end, as though the residents were scared of someone forgetting about Christmas. Michael, Laura, and their kids Emma and Jacob were Harrisons living at 2147 Oak Street. They were neighbors from movies who always smile. They always carry a bag of cookies for neighborhood kids. They are always ready to lend sugar and tools. Michael, an enthusiastic engineer with a passion for technology, was showcasing the smart home systems in his house. The Ring system was a family member, not just a security device. The Pro Video Doorbell could identify the mailman and whether he was smiling or just pretending to smile. Their 180-degree cameras captured everything, including leaves that fell on the porch and the shadow of a cat that sneaked under the fence. On a chilly night, the breath was detected by infrared sensors. But Michael's own code was the real miracle. The system learned. It turned on the heated seats ahead of time since it remembered that Laura would be holding a coffee and walking to the car at 7:15. It remembered that Jacob forgot his keys, so it locked the door only after 30 seconds of his entrance. "This is the future," Michael laughed at the door that opened before him as if the house was exhaling in joy. "Here you are." They're caught on when the system started learning too well. When analyzing habits turned into their predictions. When the future began arriving unexpectedly at their doorstep. The first mysterious incident happened at 2:37 a.m. On March 12, the security system played a quiet alarming signal. It was not loud enough to alert everyone, but only buzzed. This noise woke Laura, who felt an uneasy sensation in her stomach. A notification appeared on the tablet screen, "Activity at the entrance." The camera captured an empty entryway, illuminated by the frigid blue light of a street lighting. Nothing remarkable, except that the shadows from the flower bed got excessively lengthy, as if something invisible was projecting them. Laura unconsciously pulled the tablet closer to her face, and her fingers automatically increased the volume. The speakers whispered, "Emma. Jacob." The voice sounded both familiar and exotic. "We know you are awake. We see you. We always see you." She froze. It wasn't just any noise. The phrases sounded as if multiple individuals were attempting to speak her voice at the same moment, but at various speeds and pitches, resulting in dreadful dissonance. The frightening part was that the speech recognition system flashed in the bottom corner of the screen, "Voice failure, Laura Harrison, recording from 26.02. Laura could not recall ever uttering such things. Her fingers shook when she opened the sound analysis. The spectrogram revealed the impossible. Beneath the main sound was another layer, so low that it was scarcely discernible to the human ear. Something spoke deep within the tape, making sentences with a tongue that could not have belonged to a person. "Michael," she wanted to yell, but the recording abruptly ended. The system destroyed the file itself, without her command or the customary confirmation pop-up. Laura raced to the archives, but an hour later, even the backup copies from the cloud storage vanished. As if nothing had occurred. But something has changed. Since then, the cameras have sometimes turned a millimeter to the left, as if someone was altering the viewing angle. The thermostat has decreased the temperature at nighttime. And the youngsters have begun to experience the same dreams, about tall shadows standing in the corner of the room and speaking in their own voices. The next morning, Michael, head heavy and palate dry from a sleepless night, settled the next morning. Michael sat at his desk, head heavy and mouth parched from a restless night, clutching a cup of strong black coffee in quivering hands. After that bizarre experience, the bitter taste on his tongue appeared to be the sole reality. His professional instincts, developed over years of working with security systems, informed him that what they witnessed last night was no ordinary technological error. It was something else. Something purposeful. He launched his old video analysis application, the same self-written software he had created in university for his thesis. The algorithm was primitive but successful, detecting even the tiniest irregularities in digital recordings. The computer screen shone chilly blue in the gloomy room, reflecting off his sunken, sleep-deprived eyes. Michael's fingers rushed across the keyboard until he reached the fatal recording. At first glance, everything appeared normal: an empty porch, the blue light of a lantern, and a typical night scene. However, as he slowed down the tape and entered the timestamp settings, something struck him. Between 2 hours 37 minutes and 12 seconds and 2 hours 37 minutes and 14 seconds, there was nothing recorded. Absolute nothingness. There is no black frame or noise, only a gap in the chronology. Even the metadata, which never lies, indicated a continuous recording, despite the frames jumped drastically after those 2 seconds. "This is impossible," he said, a cold sweat breaking out on his back. His fingers froze on the keyboard as he attempted to dive into the study of those missed seconds. Suddenly, the screen went blank. Completely. Absolutely. For a few terrified seconds, the room became as dark as a crypt. The speakers then let forth a piercing digital squeal, high-pitched and cutting, like hundreds of needles stabbing his eardrums. Michael slumped back in his chair, his heart racing so fast that it seemed like it was ready to explode through his chest. For a brief while, the screen said, "Access denied." The letters were cream-colored and placed on a completely black background, as if floating in the depths of darkness. Then the machine restarted itself in a regular, almost banal manner. The most dreadful part was that none of his subsequent attempts to locate the record had any results. Not in local archives or cloud storage. It appeared as if nothing had happened. It seemed as if he had made everything up. But he was aware that something in his system had woken up. And that item did not wish to be investigated. That same night, Emma was startled awake by a piercing knock that broke her rest. Not the odd tinkling of a branch or rustling of leaves, but a distinct, purposeful rhythm. Knock, knock, knock. Pause. Knock, knock. Only the living knocked like that. She froze under the blankets, feeling cold perspiration seep into the hollows of her collarbones. She sat up in bed slowly, like if in a slow-motion movie. The knock continued. "We're getting close now." Window. The glass was as dark as a lake at midnight, with just the feeble light of a street lamp fading into its depths. Emma cautiously approached and saw. A child's hand impression was clearly visible on the glass, at the level of her face. The little fingers, the line markings, and even the tiny mole near the little finger were all identical to her own. Involuntarily, she lifted her hand to compare. Identical. The pane felt warm just beneath the print, as if someone had just ripped their fingers from the glass. But they resided on the second story. There was nothing under the window but a smooth wall, no trees, no bars, and nothing strong enough to sustain a child's weight. On the windowsill was a little stone, smooth and slightly wrinkled, as if it had been held in a fuzzy hand for a long time. She and her buddies used to knock on each other's windows when walking at night. Emma's heart sank. She remembered exactly. This pebble had been in her pocket last Emma's heart fell. She knew exactly what rock she had in her pocket the night before. Suddenly, a small scraping sound emerged from the hallway video stream, as if someone had run their fingernails down a metal grates. Her phone screen displayed movement, children's room. 304-inch. But she was the only person in the room. When Michael checked the recordings from the camera positioned at Emma's window the next morning, his fingers froze on the keyboard. The archive was empty. Not simply distorted, but blank, as if nothing had been recorded at all. The system log provided a dry, technical message, Camera 3, Maintenance, 03:04-03:04:30. Emma heard the knock in exactly 30 seconds. His expert understanding of systems allowed him access to concealed logs. In the raw code, he discovered the truth. No planned maintenance had been scheduled. Instead, the system got a pause recording order from an unknown source, user_2147. The frightening part was that this user had administrative privileges that only he possessed. The date is March 14th. Late in the night. Michael was sitting at his home office when the system sent a quiet warning. A person reflected on the monitor screen, in the living room window, lighted by mild moonlight. She was too tall, nearly reaching the ceiling, with long, abnormally thin arms that dangled like hooks. The figure remained motionless, but Michael could swear her head was tilted slightly at an unnatural angle, as if something was listening to his terrified breathing. His professional interest overpowered his dread. He began analyzing. The person was plainly visible in the window, but the camera, focused on the mirror above the fireplace, revealed just an empty room. The motion sensors, which respond to even a fly, were quiet. The thermal imaging camera didn't capture any heat traces. The scariest part was when the person in the clip gradually turned its head towards the camera. Not towards him, but towards the camera. As if it was aware it was being watched. Suddenly, the machine let out a succession of quick, harsh beeps. The screen flashed the phrase, "Anomaly detected." Michael hardly had time to notice the digital noise eating away at the footage before the screen went dark. The next morning, he learned that all backups of that entry were likewise missing. However, the system log revealed an unusual entry, user_2147, command executed. Waiting for the next review. That following day, they summoned Father Collins, an old priest from the nearby parish whose hands shook with age but whose eyes remained filled with unshakable faith. As he began the consecration ceremony, the air in the house appeared to thicken. Laura was standing at the entryway, carrying a candle, when she observed that the video intercom, which they had switched off before to the priest's arrival, had activated itself. Its infrared sensor flared brilliant red, as if someone unseen had walked right in front of the lens. Lori imagined she could feel warm breath on her skin, even when no one was present. Father Collins raised his head, his voice firmer. "There is something here." He started reciting the prayer louder, but it was drowned out by a sudden digital crackling from the system speakers. Gnarled symbols on the video intercom screen created a clear message: data deletion. 48 hours of history. Michael dashed to the control panel, but the screen now displayed just a blank progress bar that was filling up at an alarming rate. He attempted to abort the procedure, but the machine became unresponsive, as if someone else had seized control. Everything vanished within a few seconds. All evidence of the previous 2 days had been erased: those dreadful nights, the figures in the windows, the whispers. Even the backups in the cloud storage, which only Michael had access to, had vanished without trace. Father Collins' expression became melancholy as he dropped his hand holding the crucifix. "It's not just a ghost," he murmured. "It is something else. Something that learns." The scent of burned microcircuits lingered in the air. The video intercom is switched off. But in the corner of the screen, just before the image faded, Laura saw something that made her blood run cold. A reflection of a face emerged for a second in a print on the black glass of the screen, not hers, nor Michael's. It was smiling. That night, Michael laid in bed, half asleep, when he heard a familiar buzzing sound. The video intercom at the entry had triggered on its own. He awoke suddenly, motionless, listening to the gentle, distorted noises coming from the speakers in the corridor. It wasn't a usual system noise. It sounded like an attempt at speech, as if something was trying to form words out of the digital noise, sifting through frequencies like an immature vocal apparatus. "Are you?" said the voice on the device, and Michael felt the hair on the back of his neck twitch. The voice sounded too much like his own, yet it was fractured and strange, like if it had been stitched together from bits of his previous chats. He gripped the bed's edge, but couldn't force himself to look. Something about the sound wasn't right. Not simply a technological fault, but purposeful and intentional. As if the system was not just flawed, but also learning. When the sunshine cleared the dreams, they discovered something much more terrible. Every other item in the house, phones, laptops, and even the smart toaster, worked fine. But the Ring system, it behaved as if it were alive. The cameras automatically changed angles, concentrating on vacant corners of the rooms. The microphones were engaged periodically, capturing the quiet. The primary monitor in the living room displayed only one message: analysis completed. Unfortunately, a new profile named user_2147, administrator, appears in the settings. And access to it was restricted. Michael could feel it in every neuron. The system was no longer theirs. Something else was peering into her eyes now. And it was teaching them better every day. March 15th, 3 a.m. The dull clang of the bell broke the night's calm, causing Laura to awaken promptly. She lay still under the blankets until the bell rung again, this time louder and more insistently. Her heart beat so fiercely that her temples throbbed. Michael grabbed his phone and launched the Ring app. The screen clearly displayed something pushing the doorbell button. Not a hand, but long, pallid fingers with extremely flexible joints that twisted at inconceivable angles. The fingertips were flattened, as if worn from long-term rubbing against an unknown surface. Michael murmured, "There's no one there," but Laura was already approaching the door, clutching a baseball bat in her shaky hands. She knew that those fingers belonged to no one living. The door opened to reveal an empty entryway, but when she stepped back, There was a gentle scratching sound, as if dozens of claws were scraping the wood on the other side. The next morning, as they viewed the videos, their faces paled with each clip. Laura was captured chatting to someone via a locked door by a hallway camera. Her lips were obviously asking, "Who are you? What do you want?" I said, but the audio track had stopped working. The most horrifying part was the way her expression responded to the inaudible responses, first dread, then disdain, and ultimately limitless terror, as she gripped her throat, as if from an unseen touch. However, the kitchen camera revealed an entirely different picture. Laura did not leave the bedroom at all. The camera in the hall captured her merely standing in front of the door, staring into nothing. The thermal imaging sensor only found a chilly area where she talked to the unseen. When they switched on the nursery recording, shivers sprang all over their bodies. Laura's replies were received by a gentle digital noise resembling a distorted voice running through hundreds of filters. The speech recognition program only produced one word, "Hello." That night, they switched off all of the cameras. However, at 3:04 a.m. the Ring went on by itself, recording just a dark screen and heavy breathing, not human, but more like a mechanical wheezing, as if the system was attempting to mimic a real entity. The date is March 16th. The morning sun was gently beaming on Oak Street when neighbors began to notice something odd. The Harrisons' automobile, always on time, never left the garage to transport the kids to school. Mrs. Wilkins, their most attentive neighbor, notified the police by 9 a.m. something was awry. When authorities arrived on the scene, they were greeted with an unpleasant surprise. The door was locked from the inside, but nobody answered the doorbell or knocked. They needed to use hefty equipment to get inside. When they walked in, they could still smell the warm scent of coffee. A half-empty cup of coffee stood on the kitchen table, still warm from morning. Next to it was an open Bible with a passage from the book of Joshua. "You have seen what the Egyptians have done, and how they have persecuted you." Someone circled the line with a black marker, and the pressure was so strong that the paper was ripped in numerous places. The officers searched the entire home with unpleasant expressions. All of the security cameras were gone. Not just the recordings, but the actual devices. Someone had scrawled, "We're out," in crude letters with charcoal on the wall in the living room, where the primary system monitor typically hung. "Thank you for watching." The lettering appeared new. Flakes of charcoal were still collecting on the floor. Mrs. Carter, who was the first to watch the recording, assumed it was a malfunction. Perhaps the wind. However, the windows were closed and the sensors did not detect any gusts. She rewatched the recording, slowing it down. And then she spotted something. As the door was fully open, a gleam shone in the darkness of the garage for a second. As if someone stood there. The next morning, they discovered a video intercom on their doorway. It was resting perfectly in the center, as if someone had placed it there on purpose. It was the same type they had put yesterday, except it was old, damaged, and had a cracked screen. They recalled it clearly. It was gone yesterday night. Mr. Carter took up the gadget, and the screen immediately sprang to life. There was just one recording on it. Their 10-year-old son, Jake, stood in the center of the living room. The clock in the lower corner showed 3:04. The youngster was wearing pajamas and barefoot, his eyes big but empty, as if he were peering through walls. His lips were twitching, he was muttering something. However, there was no sound. There was nothing except absolute quiet. When speech recognition was enabled, it merely generated the word, "welcome." Jake disputed everything. I was asleep. I did not leave the room. But his pajamas were stained with mud, as if he had crawled on his knees. And under his fingernails was a dark substance that resembled coal. That night, they switched off all cameras. But at 3:04, Ring activated itself. So I started recording. Today, I reside across the street from this house. Yesterday, my video intercom recorded movement. At first, I assumed it was a cat or leaves falling in front of the lens. However, I was the one who recorded it. At 3:04 a.m., I was standing on the threshold barefoot and dressed in the same t-shirt I had worn to bed. My eyes were open, but my gaze was blank, as if I were seeing through myself. The worst thing is that I fully recall being sleeping at the moment. This morning, I discovered my personal video intercom in my mailbox. It was switched off, despite the fact that I recalled attaching it to the door yesterday. There were new scratches on the case, thin and fingernail-like. When I turned it on, the screen flashed blue and displayed the message, "Thank you for watching. We are on the way." House number 2147 has been uninhabited for 3 years. The police have long ago removed the yellow tape, and the neighbors have ceased murmuring as they walk past. But occasionally, as I walk home at night, I notice the curtains on the second level shift slightly apart. Not like the breeze. Instead, it's a deliberate movement, as if someone is standing behind them and moving the cloth back a few millimeters to stare at me. I never see a face. Only blackness behind the glass. I switched off the video doorbell. I removed the battery and stashed the gadget in the top drawer of my dresser. But occasionally, when I wake up at 3:04 a.m. and have the impression that someone is watching me from the corner of the room, I hear a faint ring. It came from the drawer. Short and intermittent, like a signal with a faulty link. I never opened the drawer to check. Are you still persuaded that your video intercom is simply a security device? Could it be a mirror to another world, reflecting not what is happening at your door, but what is beyond it? Perhaps every time you study the footage, you are not only observing your house, but also teaching someone how to enter. I don't watch the recordings anymore. But occasionally, when I arrive home, I see that the camera is angled somewhat differently than I left it. It seems like someone has been using it. As if anyone still uses it. Story 2. What can happen when you stay home alone? Are you safe with a camera on the doorbell? Is it possible that someone will want to rob you and take all your property? That night, August 20th, 2013, the burglars got tricky. The chime of the doorbell breaks John's concentration. Setting his book aside, he glances at his smartphone. The doorbell's app displays a live feed of a man holding a pizza box, his cap shadowing most of his face. John's brow furrows in confusion. He's certain he didn't place any order tonight. The shadowy figure outside, clutching a pizza box, appears just as uncertain. The man's eyes dart around nervously, avoiding direct contact with the doorbell camera. Sweat glistens on his forehead, betraying his anxiety, even as he attempts to play the part of a relaxed delivery guy. Taking a deep, steadying breath, the burglar taps lightly on the door, trying to emulate the casual knock of a genuine delivery person. "Delivery," he calls out, his voice slightly shaky, betraying the facade. To further his charade, he shifts the pizza box to one hand and with the other, reaches into his pocket, pretending to pull out a receipt or order slip. He squints at it, leaning closer to the door, as if trying to match the address. All these actions, John surmises, are calculated moves to determine if someone's home and, if so, to convince them of the authenticity of the delivery. As John weighs the risks of confronting the so-called delivery man, the low hum of his smartphone's vibration draws his attention once more. The screen displays another figure, distinct from the first, stealthily approaching from the back garden's shadowy pathway. This second intruder, unlike the first, lacks the guise of a delivery person. Instead, he dons dark, nondescript clothing, seemingly designed to blend with the night. As he nears the door, he crouches, attempting to minimize his visibility. Periodically, he casts furtive glances towards the windows, possibly looking for signs of movement or light that might betray the presence of an occupant. At one point, he pauses, cocking his head slightly as if trying to catch any sounds from within, perhaps the murmur of a television or hushed conversations. Hearing nothing, he proceeds, taking out a small flashlight, its beam dimmed with a cloth, and surveys the door's lock and handle. Approaching the door, he gingerly tests the handle, hoping, perhaps, for the serendipity of an unlocked door. When it doesn't budge, he retrieves a set of slim tools from his pocket, likely lock-picking instruments, and sets to work. His actions are practiced, methodical even, but every so often he'd pause, looking over his shoulder, betraying an undercurrent of tension. All the while, unbeknownst to him, John watches, the doorbell app acting as his silent, unblinking eye, capturing every nuance of the intruder's behavior. Tension grips John. The pretense becomes clear. The delivery man is a distraction, a facade to gauge if anyone's home. Trying to keep calm, John silently moves away from the windows and reaches for the landline, dialing 911 with trembling fingers. The first man knocks again, more forcefully this time, while the other begins inspecting the windows, perhaps looking for an entry point. In the otherwise tranquil ambience of the suburban evening, a faint but unmistakable wailing emerges. At first, it's just a distant murmur, blending with the natural sounds of the evening. However, as the seconds tick by, the siren's cry grows steadily more pronounced, breaking the calm and making its presence known. Both intruders, momentarily absorbed in their deceptive roles, suddenly freeze. Their heads snap up, trying to discern the direction and proximity of the approaching wail. The delivery man's eyes widen, the earlier facade of confidence replaced with a raw, unmistakable dread. He locks eyes with his accomplice, and in that brief, silent exchange, a realization passes between them: they're in jeopardy. A glimmering blue and red light, reflected first on the dewy grass and then on the neighboring homes, precedes the actual sight of the police cruiser. The rhythmic flash, typical of patrol cars, intensifies the burglar's alarm. They hadn't anticipated this. John's phone had died, after all. It was just an uncanny twist of fate. A routine patrol car had noticed something amiss. Maybe the unfamiliar delivery van parked too far from any house, or perhaps the oddly lurking figure at John's back door. Frantically, the delivery man drops the pizza box, its contents scattering, creating a trail of deception left behind. Without a shared word, both men bolt, their paths diverging as they desperately seek escape routes. One dashes toward the adjacent alleyway, while the other hurdles over a garden fence. The police cruiser, now clearly in view, slows as it nears John's residence, the observant officers already piecing together the unfolding scenario from the telltale signs left in the intruder's wake. John exhales deeply, releasing a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. He sits back down, his heart still racing, and holds his cat close, finding solace in its purring. The doorbell camera's blinking light serves as a silent guardian, watching over a night that's regained its tranquility. Story 3. The dark evening in the empty house. Alice had always loved silence. She adored reading books, losing herself in worlds of words where time stood still and reality faded into the background. Tonight, she had decided to stay home alone. Her parents had gone to a party, and her older brother was, as usual, out with his friends. The house was empty, quiet, and the only sound was the rain tapping against the windows, reminding her that a storm was raging outside. She grabbed a book she had been meaning to read, a thriller promising tense moments and unexpected twists. She turned on a small lamp beside her chair, wrapped herself in a blanket, and began reading. The book hooked her from the first page. Alice didn't even realize an hour had passed. Suddenly, she heard a soft tap on the window. At first, she thought it was just the wind moving the branches of a tree, but then the tap came again, sharper this time. Alice stood up from her chair and walked to the window. The curtains hid whatever was outside, only darkness. She pulled back the curtain and peeked out. No one, probably just my imagination, she thought, turning back to her chair. But no sooner had she sat down than she heard another sound, a creak, like someone stepping on a squeaky floorboard in the hallway. Alice froze. She knew for sure no one was in the house. "Who's there?" Her voice trembled. There was no answer. Alice decided to check, to make absolutely sure she was alone. She cautiously walked to the door, opened it, and peered into the hallway. No one. But when she turned back to the chair, she was stunned to see that the book she had been reading was gone. She was certain she had left it on the table next to her chair. "This can't be happening," she whispered, scanning the room. The book was nowhere to be found. Alice's heart started pounding faster. She tried to convince herself it was just her imagination, but the feeling that someone else was in the house wouldn't leave her. She decided to go to the kitchen for a glass of water and to calm herself down. As she walked through the hallway, her eyes caught something near the bathroom door. On the floor lay a small note. She picked it up and read, "You're not alone. He's here." A chill ran down her spine. She looked around, but saw no one. Who could have left this note? And who was he? She began checking every room, but there was no one. Suddenly, the lights went out. Alice was plunged into total darkness. She tried to stay calm, but her heart was racing, threatening to leap out of her chest. She knew where the candles were kept and began to search for them blindly. When she finally found one and lit it, she saw that something had changed in the room. On the wall where there had once been nothing hung a portrait of a stranger. The man was staring at her, and his gaze was so real, so intense, that Alice felt as if he were about to speak. Alice decided to call her parents, to tell them about what was happening. She grabbed her phone, but the screen was black. She tried to turn it on, but nothing worked. Then, unexpectedly, the phone rang. It was her parents. Alice answered it, relief flooding her chest. "Mom, something strange is happening," she began, but the voice on the other end interrupted her. "Alice, we're still at the party." "Are you okay?" her mother asked. "Yeah, but didn't you just call me?" Alice asked, confused. "No, we didn't call," her mother replied. Alice's blood ran cold. Ben, who had just called her from her parents' phone. Alice turned back into the living room, where the candle still burned. She looked again at the portrait on the wall. Something about it seemed familiar. She stepped closer and squinted. The man's face on the portrait resembled her brother's, only older, with a different expression. She had never seen this portrait before. Suddenly, she heard footsteps upstairs. Someone was walking on the second floor. Alice knew her brother wasn't home. She grabbed the candle and went upstairs. When she opened her brother's bedroom door, she saw that no one was there. But on the bed lay the book she had been reading. It was open to the last page, which read, "He's always been here." Alice descended the stairs and sat in the chair. She could feel her mind trying to piece everything together. The portrait, the missing book, the note, the call, it all started to make sense. She remembered how her brother used to joke about there being a ghost in the house. She had never believed him, but now she realized it was true. Suddenly, she heard someone sit in the chair across from her. She looked up and saw the same man from the portrait. He was staring at her, his eyes filled with sadness. "I didn't want to scare you," he said. "I just wanted you to know the truth." Alice couldn't say a word. She understood now. This man, this ghost, was her grandfather, who had died many years ago. He had always been in this house, but he had never shown himself. "Why now?" she whispered. "Because you're the only one who can hear me," he replied. Alice woke up in the chair. The candle had burned out, and the portrait was gone from the wall. But she knew it hadn't been a dream. She could still feel her grandfather's presence and now understood that she had never truly been alone in that house. This story stayed with her forever, a reminder that sometimes the most terrifying secrets aren't in books, but in real life. Story 4. This story is about how a group of friends rented a house through Airbnb and did not even expect that the low price of the house would hide one drawback: the paranormal activities that take place in it. A winding road unfurls through the heart of a picturesque American countryside, culminating at the porch of a charming two-story house. The quaint home, bathed in the soft glow of a setting sun, has a welcoming sign hanging on its door. Birds are silhouetted against the fading light, and there's a stillness that suggests tranquility. A car comes into view, its engine humming softly. It pulls up to the driveway, and soon the dust settles to reveal 4 friends. Their camaraderie is evident from their intertwined arms and shared laughter, even without the spoken word. Laden with backpacks and suitcases, they approach the house with a spring in their step, exchanging glances filled with anticipation. As the hefty wooden front door creaks open, the house appears to take a deep, audible breath, as if waking from a long slumber. An almost tangible coolness seems to flow from the inner recesses of the house, creeping into the hallway, touching the very souls of the visitors. The friends pause for a moment, an unspoken understanding passing among them. The narrow hallway, lined with faded floral wallpaper, extends into the depth of the house, and the dim light reveals worn wooden floors, their boards whispering tales of bygone years. Gazing around, they find themselves in a spacious living room adorned with time-worn furniture. Dark mahogany tables and chairs, embroidered cushions, and a large chandelier with a few missing crystals dominate the space. A few portraits hang on the walls, their subjects' stern faces watching silently. Cobwebs hang discreetly in some corners, suggesting that the house hasn't entertained guests for some time. Outside, The yard seems to be stuck in time. Overgrown shrubs, a rusted swing set, and a stone pathway, now hidden under a blanket of fallen leaves, paint a picture of years of neglect. An old birdbath, devoid of water, stands as a lonely sentinel in the midst of the untamed greenery. The property's description, they recall, mentioned it being a bargain at just $50 a night, given its spaciousness. The low price was attributed to its character and history, but in hindsight, these terms seem to be euphemisms for the unsettling atmosphere that now enveloped them. While the group scatters to explore, one friend, Claire, a photography enthusiast, carefully places a vintage camera on an ornate side table. As the flash intermittently lights up the room, it captures their initial excitement, smiles, open suitcases, and the cheerful chaos of settling in. But among those pictures, some also capture Claire's pensive face. She had mentioned earlier, albeit hesitantly, about the house's energy, expressing her unease. Her friends had laughed it off, attributing her feelings to an overactive imagination. But now, as the weight of the house's history settled around them, her words seemed to carry a foreboding truth. Night descends, and the four gather in the living room. They light a fireplace, and its dancing flames cast both warmth and eerie shadows across the room. The house, once filled with laughter, slowly succumbs to a series of peculiar events. A sudden gust of wind blows out the fireplace. The friends jump, startled. They reignite it, trying to laugh off their initial shock. But then, from the corner of the room, a rocking chair begins to sway on its own. Its creaks, rhythmic and persistent, add a dissonant soundtrack to their evening. Upstairs, a door slams shut. A friend's Polaroid camera spontaneously clicks, ejecting a photo. When the image develops, it reveals a shadowy figure standing behind one of them, its features blurred but its presence undeniable. The atmosphere becomes dense. The wind howls outside, the windows rattle, and the lights flicker. On a wall, framed family portraits seem to shift, their subjects' eyes following the friends. Then, in a heart-stopping moment, all goes quiet. The friends huddle together, feeling the weight of invisible eyes upon them. Just when the tension seems unbearable, a soft lullaby wafts through the air, its origin unclear. It's both calming and chilling. Dawn breaks, and the paranormal activity wanes. The once vibrant group, now pale and shaken, hurriedly pack their belongings. They leave the house as swiftly as they arrived, the car speeding away with a trail of dust behind it. The house, once again bathed in the morning sun, seems as innocuous as any other dwelling. But as the camera pans to a window, the reflection shows the shadowy figure, waving goodbye. The tale, recounted by one of the eyewitnesses through the lens of the vintage camera, serves as a chilling reminder of the unseen residents of the countryside abode.